Good afternoon. I am Don McHale, Professor of History at Clemson University, and I thank you for coming here today to remember and celebrate with us the life of Dr. Alan Schaffer, Professor Emeritus of History and former Faculty Senate President at the university. Alan died on August the 16th after a lengthy struggle with cancer. And before we begin the celebration of Alan and his life, I wish first to thank his family and wife, Jane Walker Herndon Schaffer, for allowing me to participate in this event to honor our colleague, honor Alan. Many of you may not know Alan's family. He loved his children and wife dearly, and they are present today. Jane, his wife, is from Atlanta, Georgia, and is herself a retired professor of history. Alan's daughter, Wendy Schaffer, and her husband, Ivan Jaya, live in New York City. Alan also has three sons, Cullen Schaffer and his wife, Nancy Cohen, from Jersey City, New Jersey, Dylan Schaffer and his wife, Jennifer Dykes, from Oakland, California, and Guthrie Schaffer and his wife, Tracy, from Denver, Colorado. Alan's four grandchildren are also present: Anshul Schaffer Cohen, Milutine Jaya, and Garrig and Reese Schaffer. In attendance as well today is Alan's longtime friend, Leon Arden, and his wife, Frankie, from London, England. It is the wish of the family that the service today includes several persons who will speak and share their memories of Professor Schaffer. I shall speak first, then two members of the family will speak, and they will be followed by two other persons, Morris Cox of Clemson and Leon Arden, each of whom will receive a bit more formal introduction later. And unfortunately for you, my remarks may be the longest. During the past few days, as I thought about this gathering, I asked myself, where does one begin in celebrating and remembering the life of one Alan Schaffer? How do we do justice to the memory of an individual who gave us so very much to remember and to admire? How do we do justice to such an incredible story of how an interesting, some perhaps would say funny-looking little Jewish professor from New York, very short and round and with a beard, nearly always talking, and usually leftist in his views, became one of the most important and well-known figures on a major rural Southern University campus. Trying to explain this, I find most daunting and, as you will see, well-nigh impossible, certainly for me. Some of you who knew Alan have described him to me variously as very special, unique, irrepressible, one of a kind, enigmatic, and a wonderful, yet very different and even strange figure. Each of us has numerous Schaffer stories to tell, almost as many stories as he told about himself, especially about different jobs he always claimed he had held before we knew him. Many of us will remember Alan for his extraordinary love of life and learning, and the unbounded energy with which he pursued them both. He was so full of restless or nervous energy, in fact, that he could rarely sit still for any length of time at events, such as lectures or performances, without leaving to stand or walk and observe them from the rear of the room. And I suspect that if he was here today at this service, he'd already be standing at the back of the hall, probably pacing. Others of us will remember Alan principally for his quick mind that held a nearly unlimited store of ideas and creativity. He was a voracious reader and reviewer of books, someone truly dedicated to the life of the mind. Still others will remember Alan for his quick, outspoken, and often cutting wit that could leave one laughing or crying, as it were, if one happened to be the object of such remarks. He possessed a superb talent for debate and dispute. Almost never did he shrink from speaking his mind, and almost never did he suffer what he believed were foolish ideas or persons who held them. On the other hand, he could admit when he was wrong, but it was rarely easy to wring such a confession out of him. Yet Alan could say things that many other persons could not and get away with it. He would tell anyone what he thought. Few persons intimidated him. Not surprising, not everyone agreed with Alan Schaffer, and he had his share of opponents. But I believe that more often than not, even they respected him. Alan Schaffer loved Clemson University, where he began work in 1974 as head of the Department of History, following teaching appointments at Michigan State University and the City College of New York. Clemson provided Alan with the opportunity to showcase his talents as a leader, amply demonstrated during his 10 years as a department head and his term during 1993 and 94 as the university's faculty senate president. During his nearly quarter century in Clemson, Alan tried and possibly managed to convince himself that he had become a Southerner. Over lunch or at other social gatherings where he loved to hold forth, he might begin at least one sentence with, "We Southerners believe," quote unquote. I first met Alan Schaffer in November of 1978 in St. Louis, when he interviewed me at a history conference for the faculty appointment at Clemson that I still hold at present. That day, I had difficulty finding his hotel room and appeared nearly a half hour late for the interview. I learned later that one of his faculty, Professor Joe Arbina, who was also part of the interview, was ready right then to cancel the interview as well as my application for the job, which is probably what should have been done. But for some reason, Alan decided to go through with the interview and eventually hired me. And I recall how intimidated I was by Professor Schaffer at our first meeting. Here was this little interesting-looking fellow who did nearly all the talking and interviewed me for 2.5 hours. Moreover, he repeatedly told me how many people he had fired at Clemson since arriving there 4 years earlier. But I sensed that he was keenly interested in what I taught, principally courses on modern German history, World War II, and the Holocaust. And I mustered the courage to accept his eventual offer of an appointment here. And in my first years at Clemson, I remember Alan, late in the afternoons, sitting in the old Hardin Hall at the large round table in the History Department lounge, trading insults, jokes, barbs, and other things better left unmentioned, with members of his faculty such as Bob Lambert, Whitey Lander, Joe Arbina, Bill Styrer, Jerry Reel, Alan Grubb, and others. I never laughed so hard in my life during those days. And it was Schaffer who was the biggest cut-up and loudest of all. One of the reasons it was so much fun to come to work in those days in the history department, and it's still fun today, was clearly the little leader of the department. He drove to work with his dog of Heinz 58 variety, named Miss Pudge, perched royally in the front seat, in an old, white, rusted-out Chevrolet Vega station wagon, which I believe he had brought from New York and that had at least 400,000 miles on it. Professor Arbina, incidentally, apparently knew Allen longer than anyone else on the Clemson campus. Joe had met Allen first in 1961, when both were in graduate school at the University of Virginia. I also recall from those early days of Allen's department leadership that he brought to his work an incredible energy and creativity, and almost literally an idea a minute. His ideas, of course, nearly always involved things for his faculty to do, not him. However, still today, a significant portion of the department curriculum, which remains popular among students, is based on what he helped to implement, including the 400-level courses that permit a good deal of flexibility in teaching and course offerings, and History 198, a one-hour course on current events. As department head, Allen steadily built one of the best history faculties in the Southeast, helping to bring excellent young scholars to Clemson, including Ed Moise and Tom King, and nurturing others that were already here. Not only did Allen set high standards for research and publication, but he also insisted on excellence in teaching from his faculty. Indeed, while head, despite his numerous administrative duties, he himself taught at least one course per semester. In 1983, shortly before he left the department headship to return to a full-time appointment as professor, the university provost, David Maxwell, much to Allen's delight, identified the department as one of 5, quote, centers of excellence, end of quote, at the university. After 1984, Allen's teaching and service to Clemson University expanded significantly beyond the department. He taught courses in American history and Western civilization in the department, as well as other classes in the humanities division of the College of Liberal Arts and in the university's Honors College. In the latter, he established the first freshman seminar, an interdisciplinary class titled Structures in Society. Not surprising, Allen Schaffer was an outstanding teacher. With his wonderful personality and mind, he related very well to students and taught lively and challenging courses. Students liked him. They liked him very much, and they filled his classes. His service to the university after 1984 reads much like a who's who list. He served 2 terms in the faculty senate, which he loved as much or more than the historical profession, and during 1993-94 he was Senate president. That was an unusually difficult year in university politics, which included the resignation of the school's president. Furthermore, Allen served as the faculty's representative on the board of the university's foundation, the first faculty member to do so. He also served for several years as a faculty grievance counselor, helping a number of his colleagues in that way too. For his extraordinary work on behalf of the faculty, Allen received in 1994 the Award of Merit from the local chapter of the American Association of University Professors, an honor he shared that year with English professor Roger Rollin, one of Allen's close friends. Also, Allen established and directed for several years the Palmetto Humanities Program, which organized public lecture series in the humanities around the state. From 1987 to 1989, he brought further public attention to the university with his weekly history book review and interview on the noon news on Channel 4 in Greenville, WYFF-TV. Most recently, during the last year of his life, Allen continued his role as a book reviewer, this time on the statewide public radio network. Also outside Clemson, Alan was an active member of the Southern Historical Association and for the past several years served on the South Carolina Humanities Council. But this was not all that this little man with a tremendous energy and wonderful mind did for the university. As another symbol of his dedication to Clemson, Alan published in 1990, as part of the university's centennial celebration, a beautifully edited pictorial history of the school titled Visions, Clemson's Yesteryears, the 1880s to 1960s. Many of you, as with numerous other friends and alumni, have a copy of this book on a coffee table or bookshelf. Thanks to the editor's generosity and commitment to the university, all royalties from the book were donated to student scholarships. To be sure, Alan loved to write, and he was quite good at it. Early in his career, he apparently had ambitions to be a professional playwright. Why he never wrote and published much more than his dissertation, completed in the early 1960s, remained a puzzle to many of his colleagues in the history department. However, in his defense, after he came to Clemson, when did he have time to do much writing? Shortly before he retired, I heard him comment that he had written enough memos to qualify as a book. There are several other memories of Alan Schaffer that I wish to share very briefly with you. One has to do with his strong professionalism, and I put the word professionalism here in quotes. For example, in 1988, when the history department hired a Russian historian, Alan pressed the department to hire Steve Marks from Harvard because he said Steve would then be the shortest person in the department and not him, Alan. How much this bit of insight really counted in the hiring of Professor Marks is unclear at best. On another occasion, back in 1984, this little bearded fellow helped me out of some trouble I encountered at a conference of historians in Georgia at Jekyll Island. I gave the keynote address at the meeting, which Professor Schaffer and Jane attended. In my address, I compared and contrasted Hitler's Germany with Stalin's Russia, and in the question and answer period that followed, I was roundly attacked for some of my views by one of the audience. Thank goodness, however, Alan Schaffer leaped to his feet, and as only he could do, ripped the critic apart verbally and defended me. Not only did I thank Alan later profusely, but I also had the following horrifying thought. That was the first time I had ever seen a keynote speaker saved by somebody in his audience. One of the most important memories I will always cherish of Alan Schaffer was his championing of toleration, diversity, and equality in issues of race, gender, religion, sexual preference, or whatever. He had no patience with bigotry in any form. Moreover, he lived this principle. For example, for 7 years, he served as advisor to the Black Students' Campus Gospel Choir. He helped as well individual students, financially and in other ways. He was almost like a father, for instance, to one of the history department's prized MA graduates, Dr. Carmen Harris. She's present here today and is a professor of American history at the University of South Carolina, Spartanburg. In addition, Alan played a major role in the founding of Clemson University's President's Commission on the Status of Women. In other places, too, he urged diversity and equality. In May 1999, he wrote, in vintage Schaffer style, the following brief letter to the editor, published in U.S. News and World Report, in response to a previous article in the magazine titled, quote, "The Mantra of Diversity," end of quote. This is what Alan wrote, and I quote, "I found John Leo's knee-jerk conservative reaction to any attempt at reasonable representation utterly fascinating. His final phrase, "Can we just go back to merit?" was particularly interesting. Does Leo really believe there was a time when merit was all that counted? Does he really believe that all those white males who moved up the job ladder earlier this century did so because of merit? He is obviously too young to remember a time when being a white male was essential to obtain an entry-level executive position in most American corporations. Does he really believe it was merit that got all those white male plumbers, electricians, bricklayers, machinists, and so on their initial jobs as apprentices? Let's lay it on the line. It was their skin color and their gender, not their ability at anything. End of quote. Signed, Alan Schaffer, professor, Clemson University, Clemson, South Carolina. Finally, I would be remiss if I failed to mention Alan Schaffer's love affair with his wide array of hobbies and interests. Cooking, eating, socializing, not always in this order, socializing and partying, listening to classical music, traveling, most recently surfing the web, and woodworking. He had a very fine woodworking shop and produced numerous pieces of very beautiful furniture for Jane and his children. I recall several years ago, on a very hot summer day, the talented woodworker asked me to drop by his house to help him move a large and very heavy saw in his shop. He told me when I arrived that he had chosen me for two reasons. First, he had wanted someone with a strong back and a weak mind. And second, he wanted someone whom he knew had university health insurance. Somehow we got the damn saw moved to where he wanted it. I hope that I've not gone on too long today talking about someone whom I loved dearly. Alan Schaffer was truly a very special person, and all of us, as well as the university as an institution, will sorely miss him. But I hope that our memories of Alan will in the future be a part not of our mourning, but rather of our happiness. For happiness, life, and energy were what he was really all about. Thank you. As I indicated earlier, several other persons now will talk about Alan. First, two of his children will speak. The first to do so is Guthrie Schaffer, Alan's youngest. And then I believe his daughter Wendy will speak to you.
Hi. My name is Guthrie Schaffer. I'm the youngest of Alan's 4 children. Thank you all for honoring my father here today. Pop came down here in the mid-'70s from New York City. Imagine that. Can you all hear me? Yeah. A short Jewish man from New York City in Clemson, South Carolina, just a few years after civil rights had America waging war against itself. And what does he do for a living? He teaches history with an interest in African American history. What do you all think was going through his mind at the time? Why would he possibly do this? I've thought about these questions more than once and think I have some insight. One, my mother was nuts. Not sure I feel like this is up for debate. I believe the rest of my family might agree. So, distance from his ex-wife might have been a motivating factor as to why he might have left. 2, the cost of living. Being Jewish, my father was raised to watch his pennies and nickels, as he tried with me. And pennies and nickels seem to go a lot farther here in Clemson, I've noticed. 3, Southern women are among the finest in the world. And my father would need a new bride. Why not a Southern belle? And he found one soon enough. And 4, he had 4 children, and we all lived in New York City. And that probably wasn't the easiest situation in the world. These are all probably legitimate reasons for his migration to the South. All reasons why he might have landed in this quaint town. But once he was here, I believe he found probably a greater reason to stay, which was change. My father thought he could talk us all into anything, whether he used truth, exaggeration, or outright falsehood. He would win most arguments. Maybe he looked at this town and thought he could make a change. Maybe he could change the Jewish community here from about 5 to 10. Maybe he thought he could change the history department into something that was a little better. Maybe he thought he could change the university into a place known for more than just the athletic department. Maybe he thought he could change the fact he felt like a minority. Maybe he thought he could change how you all thought. Whether he accomplished any of these things is in each of our hearts. But my father came here, an awkward little Jewish man from New York City. And judging from the number of people here today and the support that my family's had over the last few weeks, I have to feel like he made some impact here. If we were to grant him one more wish, I would ask that we continue to try and make this university and this community a better place to live. Thank you all.
Since my dad died, I'm Wendy, I'm his daughter. Since my dad died, I've been trying to remember what he taught me, what I've taken away from all these years, what I should cherish, since our memories are all too human and apt to fail. The earliest memory I have is of my dad putting me to sleep. I put our son to sleep the same way with the same songs, Michael Rowe and Kumbaya and This Land Is Your Land. He taught me how to worry, which he raised to an art form, and how to compare prices in the supermarket. He taught me people are created equally only if we treat them equally. Along that same line, he taught me, much to my husband's chagrin, to vote the straight Democratic ticket. He insisted I learn to type properly at 60 words a minute. He tried unsuccessfully to teach me the proper way to cut tomatoes, which of course meant his way, and honestly, I still can't remember whether that means wedges or slices. He showed me the great outdoors, which meant camping trips in the Smoky Mountains. We played Scrabble on the picnic table, listened to faraway places on his radio under starry skies, and hid in his car when a bear came to visit our campsite. He taught me to fish and then was exasperated when I caught something and he didn't. He introduced me at a very tender age to writers and writing, letting us hang out at the Lion's Den on Sunday afternoons where famous writers gathered. The other highlight of Greenwich Village he shared with me, probably not to my benefit, was the amazing penny candy store. He taught me to love animals, especially mutts, which he may have momentarily regretted when I appeared on his doorstep 7 years ago and asked him to take care of our mutt named Ginger. He showed me the wonders of Clemson. When we were kids, I was always so excited to see those tiger paws on the drive from the airport. He shared his university with me, and with it, some of my most amazing friends. The last time I was anywhere near a podium was my graduation from Clemson. My dad, adorned in academic robes, waited at the edge of the stage, as proud as ever with his children's many accomplishments. He taught me to ice skate, which I don't think he knew how to do himself, and how and had a bowl, which may explain why I never broke 100. He tried to teach me history, but never quite managed, and I got back at him by trying to teach him math. The last few years, he shared his disease with me. He showed me and all of us how to really live with cancer, where the living part and not the disease is the priority. He spent his time knowing it was limited with his 4 children and our families, with his 4 wonderful grandchildren, with his brother, with his wife, and with his friends. He explored the world both physically and mentally, from Japan to France, from his book review radio program to flying lessons. The last time I was in a small plane over Clemson, my dad was at the controls. Only 8 weeks ago, my father was baking chocolate croissants in New York with Dylan. He gave 2 to our 3-year-old, who immediately devoured one and then fell asleep in bed, possessively clutching the other. We all woke up to quite a mess. The last few weeks, he taught me what it means to be a daughter when your dad is dying. That was the hardest lesson. That came to mean for me, and I think for all of us, lending him the support and the love that made dying bearable. The same support and love that you have given to us, and that has helped me and will help me, through the lonely days without him. Thank you.
Thank you, Guthrie. Thank you, Wendy. Alan Schaffer never forgot the people who brought him to Clemson University in 1974, and these persons included the university president, R.C. Edwards, the university provost, Victor Hurst, and especially the dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Morris Cox. Alan always admired each of these individuals, especially, he said, for their good judgment in hiring him. Dean Emeritus Morris Cox, who is today a lawyer in Clemson, has graciously consented to share with us his thoughts about Professor Schaffer. Dean Cox.
I want to note, first of all, that Professor McHale offered to come over to the steps and help me up them. I glared at him, and he quickly said, though I'm sure that won't be necessary. McHale was a close friend of Schaffer, and told you about his personality and so on. I'm glad to say that I did have a part in bringing Alan Schaffer to Clemson, and what I have to say is mostly about his and my relationship as department head and dean. He came here as professor of history and head of the department in 1974. He had received his doctorate at the University of Virginia. He had a book ready for publication on the life of Scott Joplin, the well-known composer of ragtime music, and he was at the time on the faculty of City College of New York. A nationwide search by a committee from the history faculty had nominated 4 well-qualified scholars for the vacant headship. And I, since I was dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the time, and as part of my standing policy, I invited every person on the history faculty to a private conference to express their preferences. Now, those of you who are in the academic world are probably aware that it is extremely unusual for any faculty body to agree on anything. A somewhat cynical colleague of mine, not a dean by the way, once remarked to me that the only thing his faculty ever agreed on was a raise in salary. But in this case, in an almost unprecedented expression of unanimity, every single response to my invitation strongly supported Schaffer. And of course, he was appointed. He accepted, to the great good fortune of Clemson University and all of us, and he served with distinction in the position for 10 years. And of course, after he stepped down, he continued as professor of American history. Now, in my opinion, being a department head is the most difficult position, the most difficult and the most challenging position in a university, with the possible exception of the presidency. The position demands a delicate balance of the most demanding toughness on the one hand and a generous slice of compassion on the other hand. And this balance is difficult to achieve. Dr. Schaffer managed to combine these characteristics with a skill that earned him not only the goodwill of his colleagues and students, but also their respect. And incidentally, my own sincere gratitude as dean. As you might guess, any dean frequently has to guess whether what he's hearing from department heads, from faculty, from students, from anybody else, whether what he's hearing is the straight stuff or whether what he's hearing is what the other person thinks that the dean wants to hear. With Schaffer, I never had that problem. I could always count on getting a straight story from Schaffer. And his frankness and sound analysis of problems made my task very much easier and my relationship with the history department very pleasant indeed. The present distinguished ranking of the Department of History and of its faculty owes much to the work of Alan Schaffer during his 10 years as its head. We were good friends, personally, and our friendship continued even after I retired in 1981. Interestingly enough, Schaffer and I were never on first name terms. We were always Dean Cox and Dr. Schaffer, even when we were out of the office or at a party or anywhere else. I don't know why that was the case, but that's the way it was. But I value the memories of his friendship. I particularly appreciated his optimistic outlook, buoyancy. The more so, perhaps, because it contrasted with my own somewhat dour temperament. Schaffer's sunny outlook persisted even through his long final illness. Just 2 or 3 days ago, when I was talking to Jane, his wife, Jane told me that 4 weeks before his death, he made a trip to New York, and for, of all reasons, to learn to make bread. But that's just what I would expect of Alan Schaffer. And it reminded me of a quotation which I have always admired which has been attributed to Martin Luther, to the effect that if he knew with certainty that the world was going to end tomorrow, he would spend this afternoon planting apple trees. I'm certain that Alan Schaffer would agree.
Final speaker today is Alan Schaffer's dear and longtime friend and playwright from London, Leon Arden. I first met Leon 2 years ago in London after Alan had given me his phone number. Leon and I spent 3 hours one evening visiting and discussing what each of us did, him writing and me historical research, but also we talked a good deal about you-know-who, our mutual acquaintance. Leon?
Alan Schaffer, I knew him as Flip. I always knew him as Flip, and I don't know what it means. Alan Schaffer and I were friends for about 50 years. That's 5-0. So I think that I may say without fear of contradiction that we were fairly well acquainted. Now, it's a cliche at meetings such as this to hear it said about the deceased that he loved life. Maybe he loved life, maybe he just ogled it from afar. Well, by God, Flip loved life and laughter and bourbon and friends and family to the hilt. So much so that he sometimes had to restrain himself. Often when we met or parted, he would say to me, "Don't hug. When you hug, I cry." I can't go through all the ins and outs of his early life, how he left home at 16, got a job in a New York newspaper as a columnist in his teens. Apparently he walked in by stealth, sat down and started typing. Someone came over to him after a while and said, "Do you work here?" And he said, "No, but I'd like to." And you know, he got the job. Someday I'd like to try that in the Oval Office. One of the jobs that he had was shop steward for a union, which interested me. I asked him, "Oh, what sort of tasks did you have?" And he said, "Really only one." He said, "It was my job to say, 'Strike! Everybody out!'" Gosh, I said, that's, big responsibility. How often did you have to do that? And he thought for a minute and he said, "Almost daily." A mutual friend of ours, also a professor from New York, said to me, "The thing about Flip is that he's the only guy I ever met who, in the middle of a conversation, will suddenly say, 'You're right, I'm wrong.'" Actually, in the 50 years I knew him, he never once said that. I don't know what that means exactly. He was married 3 times. As I understand it, the first was a training marriage. His tour of duty during his second marriage resulted in his being awarded the Purple Heart. His third marriage to the remarkable Jane Walker was one of love, happiness, and contentment. You see, he liked to experience all kinds of life. As for politics, he was the major influence in my life. When we met, I was one of those who thought that one's sole obligation as a citizen was to hate Richard Nixon. I knew that my tutorial with Professor Schaffer was complete when I found out afterward, whenever I talked politics with people, someone would usually sidle up to me and say, "Don't worry, this is America, that'll never happen." He hated communism, he hated capitalism, and he strongly disliked the New York Yankees. He wasn't one to take the easy way out. At a time when senior citizens were shopping around for walking frames, Alan learned to fly. He got his pilot's license in his 60s and offered to show me South Carolina from 6,000 feet. Now remember, this is a guy who looked like he came in third in a Woody Allen lookalike contest. When he was told that he had only years to live, a couple of years to live, he started learning Spanish. I'm not sure what that means. There is a hell of a lot more to say about him, but we would be here all night. I would like to make one final point. He was the most extraordinary man I ever met. He is gone, and much, much too soon. But for me, Alan is someone I will lose only by my own death, not by his. Thank you.
Thank you again for being a part of this memorial service. For help in planning and organizing the service, I particularly want to thank Kathy Sturkey, the administrative assistant of the Faculty Senate and one of Alan's closest friends on campus. Kathy was indispensable in coordinating everything. And also thanks are due to the Faculty Senate for sponsoring the reception in the lobby at the back, where immediately following the end of the service, which is presently, the Schaffer family, Jane and Leon, hope to meet and visit with as many of you as possible. I have also been asked to urge you to sign the notebook in the lobby before you leave, which will be a guest book for the family. Then at 3 o'clock this afternoon, the carillon bells at Tillman Hall will ring 73 times in honor of Alan Schaffer's life and years. Please now, if you will, allow the family to exit to the lobby first, and we are concluded. Thank you.